All right, hello everyone and welcome. So I'm Michael Strauss. I'm a political science professor here at TCU and I'm the director of Asian Studies. So on behalf of Asian Studies, TCU Asian Studies, as well as the TCU Contemplative Studies Department, we're delighted to welcome Dr. Chaoul to our online speaker series. He's our third speaker, and I just want to briefly mention our fourth, just so you can kind of keep that in mind. On April 15th, Tax Day, at the same time, so 7 p.m. on a Thursday, Dr. Allison Alexi from the University of Michigan is going to be speaking. She's an anthropologist who's just published a book on divorce in Japan. So she's going to be speaking about that. So I think it will be terrific, but also today's talk will be terrific. But before we hear from today's talk, I want to briefly introduce Dr. Dennis, who's a religion professor at TCU, as well as the director of our Contemplative Studies program.
Thanks, Mike. As Mike said, I'm Mark Dennis. I teach in the religion department, and I'm actually here with Blake Hester and Andy Fort. We're all in this contemplative studies thing together. We're doing a lot of programming on campus, meditation, mindfulness. If you're interested, please email me and I can put you on our mailing list. I'm easy to find in the religion department, m.dennis@tcu.edu. And then I wanted to say a couple of things about Ale. Ale and I go way back. Andy and Ale go way, way back. So Andy's going to do more of the introduction, but I've known Ale for maybe 12 or 13 years now, and we've seen each other a lot. He's come to my classes, and he's such a charismatic figure and wonderful human being. You know, there's people you meet in your life who give you energy. Every time I see him, I feel energy. So I'm always excited to see him. And I just want to tell one other kind of brief story, and then I'll turn it over to Andy. But Andy and I, you know, we've been working at this for a long time. We've had lots of meals, you know, trying to kind of promote meditation and mindfulness. And every time Ale comes up, we go out and have a meal. And one of the most memorable ones was going to Old South and having pancakes and talking about soccer. One of the things you may not know is Ale is from Argentina. And if you are from Argentina, soccer is a religion. And I was just thinking about that. We had so much fun, and it's been so long since something that's, you know, such a normal part of life. And I miss that. So I'm looking forward to the day when we can eat pancakes again, Ale. So Andy, I'd turn it over to you.
Would you say don't messy with Ale? Soccer joke, fans. Yeah, I've known Ale a long time, and I want to do the formal sort of series of titles, which is so impressive. And then you'll see he's such wonderful, down-to-earth, informal guy that you'd never know this. But one of the way I'll start saying it before I give the formal titles is he's a person who both has a PhD in Tibetan Buddhism from Rice University, so he's a very serious scholar. He is also very serious practitioner. He's a leading student of Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, who is a very advanced Tibetan Buddhist master. And I imagine he'll talk a bit about the third leg, although that's not what he's doing right now, is working at MD Anderson Cancer Center, which again is at the very highest level. So someone with those three sort of talents at the very highest level is quite unusual. Formally, he's the founding director of the Jung Center, which is based in Houston, Mind, Body, Spirit Institute. He remains an adjunct faculty in the integrative medicine program at MD Anderson and at the McGovern Center for Humanities and Ethics at UT Health Medical School there. And like I said, he's also got his PhD in Tibetan religions from Rice. So I could go on, but I think people want to hear from Ale. So please, sir, you're up.
Thank you, Andrew and Mark and Mike for inviting me. I totally agree with Mark. I'd rather be having coffee and pancakes with you all. Um, and um, and I love when I get to go to Fort Worth. And I learned that Fort Worth and Dallas are not the same thing, which for us in Houston, we always confuse, or I always confuse it. As Mark said, I'm originally from Argentina. So for me, religion has always been very interesting because I was born in a very Catholic country, but in a Jewish family, went to Presbyterian school. And of course, that led me to become Buddhist. And so within that path, for me, it has been both, as maybe for many of you, both personal search as well as academic, and it has been having its kind of turns, as I'll mention some. And I do want to say that Mark and Andy both have been really important in my life as, and particularly Andy, as I know him for longer, as mentor, particularly in difficult times in academia, which we know we many times have. So I want to thank you both for having me so many times. So some of the things I'll say, Andy and Mark, feel free to turn off your screen and have a coffee or sleep because you've heard it before. And I thought I would do something that, and let me see if I can share my screen and if you can actually all see it. Let me put it in slideshow, play from the start. Is the screen seen well? Yeah, okay. So I call it sometimes from the Himalayas to the clinic. And so, and as you can see as a subtitle, Tibetan mind-body practices in the Texas Medical Center, which, as you know, it's a large medical center here in Houston. As someone that I worked with before, he would say it's the largest medical center the world has ever seen. It is large. I don't know if it is the largest, but there's a lot of things happening here. And as you heard, my training has been in the Tibetan tradition. And so for me, coming to do my PhD at Rice was a place of merging of cultures. And so the reason I call it from the Himalayas to the clinic is because what I've learned really, it really comes from my teachers and from this culture, but really as it migrates to the West, things change. And there's particular ways of how we interpret that and how we think of those things to be valid or not. So this is a monastery in India called Menri Monastery. So Menri in Tibetan means medicine mountain. And it's a monastery that I've been many times and trained there. And one of the things I love about this place is that it's a huge complex with many parts. It has a monastery, so for monks. It has a nunnery for nuns. It has places for people like us, Westerners, as they call them, Ingis. And then it has a medical aspect, which is a clinic, as well as a school that has both the Tibetan medicine as well as the Western medicine. And then it's surrounded by the village. And so villagers come to the monastery both to learn, to pray, and so forth. So it's really one of those mandalas, and I'll mention this word again, but I guess in Asian studies, I'll need to do much of explanation on that. It's kind of a real live mandala, a mandala that is alive. And this is His Holiness Lumto Tempanima. He passed away a few years back. He was the abbot of that monastery that I just showed for many years. I've been very, very fortunate to train with him. And he was also very interested in medicine. So he was always interested in how these practices, these meditation and Tibetan yoga really can have a way of supporting people in the West in different ways of healing. So not just in the sense of, yes, practicing to get to enlightenment, whatever that is, but also to something that is more here and now, which is all those different areas of healing. So it's dear to my heart. Another person that you may know, his son is the Dalai Lama, and he was really the way in for me into these practices. I was traveling in India, and I was actually there in 1989 when His Holiness was actually named or received the Nobel Peace Prize. And I remember being in the area of Kashmir where I saw that. I saw it in a newspaper. And even though I really didn't know him much, I didn't know that much about him, I was really happy, like if it was my mom or my dad who had got the Nobel Prize. And all I really knew about him is that I had been visiting that area of Ladakh. And for those who are in Asian studies, you know that area, but for those who, you know, it's like where India makes like a little mushroom there. And I had been visiting different monasteries, and every monastery had a picture of the Dalai Lama, and the reverence with which the monks would honor this picture, and the ways that you could see them, kind of that energetic, even with a photo, that really inspired me. And I did get to go meet him. So I went to Dharamsala, which is where he is. He and 100,000 of the Tibetans came into exile in the 50s, in 59. And so he was there. The first time I met him, he was giving an address to the TCV, the Tibetan Children Village. It was the 40th anniversary. And I was impacted by his presence. And he laughed, as he many times does. And he looked at me, what I thought looked at me many times. Remember, I'm Argentinian, so I have that ego part with me. So I felt that he looked at me many times, and I was taking pictures. And remember, this is 89, so no, the cameras were not digital. And I took probably all the 36 pictures in my roll there. And when I went to develop them, none came out. And I was shaking. I couldn't keep still in this presence. And one of the other times that I met him, one of the things that really struck me was not only his simplicity and his laughter, when I actually was next to him and he asked me my name, I was like, I couldn't speak. And he gave me his kata, which is a symbol of blessing, and kind of gone. And he left me crying. I mean, I was so touched. And then someone came and asked him if there was anything special that he could say. And he said, a good heart is the best religion. And those words really stuck with me, touched me in a really open way. You know, I think if I tell my kids about, well, a good heart is the best religion, their reply would be, duh. But, you know, for me, and, you know, maybe because I was in the situation I was, I really felt really struck by that. And in fact, a few years later, I was able to bring him to Argentina to organize the visit of His Holiness to Argentina in 92. And we created a book called Un buen corazón es la mejor religión. A good heart is the best religion. And that has always been something that stayed with me and continues to be one of my mantras, if I could use that word. Now, he also was the one who continued to direct me into medicine. And one of the things he said, while I was able to travel with the entourage to Chile and Venezuela, and when we were in Chile, we had some time that I could be with him. And he mentioned the importance of Tibetan medicine as a nonviolent way to bring all these openness of the teachings of Dharma. And one of the things, so when you see this, this is the mandala of Medicine Buddha. And so the image to your right is what is in the center of this mandala. And the Buddha is an omniscient being, and he or she has the capacity of seeing, perceiving the suffering of all beings. And at the same time, being in the center of the mandala, so you may not know the word in Tibetan, which is Gilkor, which means center and periphery, right? So in a way, there's a dynamism between the center and the periphery. And in this case, the center being the medicine Buddha observes and feels the suffering of all beings. And he or she has at their disposal all these other people around him, all the medicines that contribute to bringing that to all sentient beings. The reason I also show this mandala is because for me, this has been another guiding principle as I came into integrative medicine. And that is that the patient is at the center. And what we want for the patient is not just physical healing, but it's physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and that around in that mandala, around there, these are all the people that we sit, when I was at MD Anderson, actually every Thursday morning, we would sit in the IDT, interdisciplinary team meeting. And, if you could see in that mandala, that would be the acupuncturist and that the massage therapist and the oncologist and so forth, everyone trying to see how can we do best for our patients and caregivers. And so for me, again, this is another symbol that stays with me. So when I met Andy, I was doing my dissertation on a practice that we call in English Tibetan yoga, but really it's called Salung Trungkor, particularly from particular text from Chartatashi Jansen. And that was my dissertation. And I was doing that. And at the same time, I was getting from medical anthropology, this ideas by Arthur Kleinman about illness and the illness experience versus the disease, which I think you know about this, different dialogues like the Dalai Lama in dialoguing in the realm of spirituality and science, realizing that instead of butting heads like in some traditions, that he was open to see they both have some ways of investigative approach to try and get to truth, but also to, more importantly, expand the horizon of human knowledge and wisdom. And so he was one of the ones who started these dialogues, which then took over into the Mind and Life Institute and their conference where Andrew, Andy, and Mark and I have been many times. Now, in 1998, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And that was a huge thing, even though he's still well, luckily. But that was what brought me to MD Anderson. And at that time, there was this small place. And if you know the big building, this is one of the small entrances there. And it was called Place of Wellness then. So it was the idea of bringing wellness into this really difficult journey. And over the years, this wellness place became the Integrative Medicine Center. Now, as we started this, and I was basically at the same year as it started, I started volunteering in the practices that I had learned and that my teachers had asked me to teach. And I felt that I was able to contribute into a model that made sense to a new way of seeing medicine. Even though this article is from 1977 and published in Science, not many people then, or even now, sometimes in some hospitals, really believe in this model. But many of us did and do. And this is that health is not in the realm of just the physical realm, but it's really at the intersection of the physical, the psycho-spiritual, and the social. And really, really pushing this model of what then became, for some of us, integrative medicine and other ways of thinking. And one of the things that it's interesting in integrative medicine is that it's not just about the clinical care, but it's also about the research and the education. And so with that, when you come to the integrative medicine and you see the oncologist, he or she would refer you to all these different programs because knows, again, like that mandala that I was saying, everyone contributes to the health of the patient. And in a way, it's not just integrative medicine at MD Anderson. There's 71 institutions that belong to the academic consortium of integrative medicine and health. And if you see these three main pillars of what we mean by integrative medicine is, one is the practitioner and patient relationship and that importance of understanding that in a way it's human to human. Second is the focus on the whole person, but also that it's informed by evidence. And the third comes a little bit back to the mandala. So the appropriate, use of the appropriate therapies, approaches, and providers and disciplines to really get to that optimal health and well-being. And so let me see if I can move this over here. And so in a way, this is the putting all these things together. You see on your left, our medical director, Gabi Lopez, and the different practices. Now, I focused, as you may know, on the mind-body practices. And mind-body practices, as they defined by NCAM, the National Center for Complementary Alternative Medicine, that now it's NCI, National Center for Complementary Integrative Health, is this variety of techniques that are designed to enhance the mind's capacity to affect bodily functions and symptoms. So how can we affect, through our mind practices, aspects of the body? And of course, in popular magazines, we see meditation, yoga, mind, body. Interesting, you see all these science off, even though I think those are not the principal investigators of the studies. But it's important that we're still looking for that understanding where it's coming from. And of course, many of you have heard of John Kabat-Zinn and all these aspects of the mindful or mindfulness revolution that we have a lot to talk about, but not for today. I know Andy loves this topic. So, but the other aspect that I think it's important is how much the practice of yoga and meditation has grown in the US population, and this is US adults. So these are two census. One was in 2012, one in 2017. So let's start with yoga. It increased from 9.5 in 2012 to 14.3. And look at meditation. It was very little done, less than 5%, 4.1. And now it's at 14.2. And probably now that we're in 2021, much more. It has grown exponentially. And a lot of people are practicing. Now, I do want to say that under these rubrics, there's a lot of things that are practiced. And so it's hard to say, well, what are you practicing when you practice yoga, when you practice meditation? But they are. Yeah. And so that's a really huge difference, because when I started in 1999 at MD Anderson, bringing meditation and yoga, people didn't know what it was. Of course, you know, in the AAR, which is the American Academy of Religion, where many of you may go to the conferences, and that's where I met Andy and Mark, you know, we would talk about these parts, whether we practice them or not. But in this population here, and it probably the same in Dallas, these were not things that were known by the majority of the US population. So seeing its increase and knowing how now there's a yoga studio, I wouldn't say as many as churches, but there's plenty of them. And one of the things why we have this is mostly because of stress. And as I mentioned, John Kabat-Zinn before, he noticed that early on. He called the technique of bringing this mindfulness, he called it MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. He realized the importance of stress and the importance of stress in a medical environment. And so, of course, we know about the acute fight or flight response, and those actually could be very useful to do a particular task. But when it's ongoing, like during COVID, then we get a lot of these deleterious effects of chronic stress, whether it's depression, relationship problems, sleep disruption, loneliness, and so forth. And so actually, Herbert Benson, who some of you may know, he's the one who connected this to another effect, physiological effect in the body. So if you think of the fight response, it's really an arousal of the sympathetic system. And then if you're able to do that task, then it rebalances with the parasympathetic. But when it doesn't, and you are in that chronic stress, you need something to rebalance it. And he found that through meditation and breathing, you could get to that rebalancing, and he called it the relaxation response. He also, as he continued doing research in this area, he did research in the area of what we call tumo, or heat yoga practice. And he found, again, as Encom defines the mind-body approaches, that through the practice of the mind and together with the breath could affect the body, in this case, in terms of heat. Now, I don't like to talk much about animal studies, but I'll talk about this one for a moment. And this is a really interesting study, because if you look at the first two columns, you see that these mice were injected by a tumor, and then they were randomized. So the ones in the left didn't get any shock. The ones on the right got a shock. And of course, as expected, the ones on the left rejected the tumor more than half than the ones in the center. But look at the right column. They have a little device. That means that when they press the device, the shock stopped. And what happened was that those not only rejected the tumor more than the ones in the center, but even more than the ones that no shock. Now, we all have some stress, so we need a device. The other thing that is interesting is we need to do it, because the ones on the third column, when they were stopping that shock, they were also stopping the shock for the second column. But really, the ones who rejected the tumor more, who in a way fertilized, who strengthened their immune system in that way, were the ones who have control. So in a way, what is our device to support that? Now, we think of stress sometimes just in the sense of, yeah, I feel stressed, I feel burnout, but it gets not just in terms of mood. It goes all the way, as Anil Sood at MD Anderson found, all the way into the tumor microenvironment, in a way promoting metastasis. The majority of the cancer patients die of metastasis, not of the primary tumor. So if we keep the stress at bay, we are helping our patients in that way. The other study that I want to mention is by Elisa Epel. So you might have heard of Elizabeth Blackburn, who got the Nobel Prize of Medicine in the mid-2000s for discovering the telomeres. So the tips of every chromosome that when we age, they start disintegrating. What she and Elisa Epel found is that through stress, they disintegrate as well. And the good news of that is that through meditation and these practices, they maintain the integrity, including the enzyme of the telomerase. So with that as a background, we decided to do some studies at MD Anderson with Lorenzo Cohen, that both Andy and Mark know, and been working with them for over 20 years. And basically trying to see how these practices can help as an intervention during a patient's journey. And we look particularly at 3 different cancers, at lymphoma, breast cancer, and lung cancer. And this was in conjunction with Ligmincha Institute, which is the Institute of Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. So before I go further, there's a lot of people that contributed to this research. And so I want to put it up front so I don't forget this. And the one on the right is Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, the one I was mentioning, the one that Andrew mentioned. He was a Rockefeller Fellow here at Rice. And the one on the left is his teacher, Lopon Tenzin Namdak. And both of them have been my teachers for 30 years. And Lopon, actually, at this time last year, I was with Lopon in Nepal in his monastery celebrating his 95th birthday. So he's now 96. So they have been really supportive. And one of the things that it's important is that as we look in many of our traditions, when we talk about mind-body practices, as we do in the medical field, it's really mind-energy body. So that energy aspect, which could be said to be related to the breath, prana, chi, these words that we use in different Asian traditions, but also to speech, to mantra, to vocalization, to prayer. So this is really the link between mind and body. And sometimes we talk, like in this Mother Tantra, about the mind being the rider, the breath being the horse, riding through the body. And so with that, we decided to do an intervention that that use these practices. Some are called Salung, some are called Trunkor. If someone is interested later, I can go over them. But basically, we did a randomized controlled trial following the science as it's done in other trials. So we have a baseline session, a baseline assessment, and then we did 7 Tibetan yoga sessions, and then a 1 month post, a 3 month post, a 6 months post. And what we found, we got to publish in 2004 in the Cancer Journal, and it was that those people, in this case with lymphoma patients, both Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's, that did the Tibetan yoga had better psychological adjustment and sleep quality, quantity, and latency, the moment you want to go to sleep until you fall asleep. And, you know, I have to admit, I was much younger then. And so I didn't realize that sleep was such a big issue. But it actually got a lot of recognition, and that allowed us to actually get a few $1 million for a study with the NCI, the National Cancer Institute, looking at the effects of this Tibetan yoga, specifically on fatigue and sleep in women with breast cancer undergoing chemo. And the reason is there was another study in between that we did specifically for breast cancer, for women with breast cancer, both undergoing chemo and radiation, but we realized that those undergoing chemo had better benefits. And so in this case, we had the opportunity, we had some money, so we had also a controlled trial that was related to exercise. And so we really were able to do not just a randomized trial between doing the Tibetan yoga and doing standard of care, but Tibetan yoga, exercise, and standard of care. And we used things that we talk about in Asian studies, right? The subtle body, the channels, that when we do the breathings, we relate to concepts that we have in our Asian medicine, things that we can expel anger through breath and attachment and confusion, and that the channels are important as we do that. And that the breath, like in Ayurveda and Tibetan medicine, there's different qualities of that breath, that there's functions of upward moving, of downward moving, of life force, of fire, and of pervasive. And that we can address that as we do different movements. And so there's also the concept of chakras, or energy centers, and that they move that energy, kind of they open that energy in those areas. Usually I use a metaphor of traffic jam. So I know it's a special day in Dallas about that, but really it opens the inner traffic jam with these practices. Now, here, it's another study that Mathieu Ricard, who's a biologist from Pasteur Institute, was part of this study. And he became a Tibetan monk and stayed as a monk, and many of you know him. Richie Davidson, who's an incredible scientist, a neuroscientist at the University of Wisconsin, started doing studies with him, also with Mingyur Rinpoche that you see in the cover of National Geographic, trying to look at what's happening at the brain level with these practices. And they found that the left frontal lobe, which brings more the affective aspect, can be changed by meditation. It can alterate the brain function, the immune function. What Sarah Lasar found, that they can change the structure of the brain, so you can have more increase your gray matter. So for those of you who go to the gym, if you stay on your cushion and meditate, you can increase. That's another kind of inner gym, mental gym. And so we decided to get into this area of studies by looking into something that we get in cancer, which is chemobrain. So the cognitive deficiencies due to chemotherapy. And so we did this trial of Tibetan sounds, and we found, again, it was a randomized trial, that those who were in the Tibetan sound meditation improved working memory, as well as speed cognitive function, as well as some perceived cognitive improvements and mental health. as well as depressive symptoms being reduced and spirituality being increased. And so lastly, the aspect of social. So the idea that it's not just about meditating by yourself, but what about in that connection? And so with one of my colleagues, Catherine Milbury, a social psychologist interested in the diet of patient and caregiver, we kind of joined forces, and with Lorenzo Cohen as well. And we did this study where it was couples doing, so a lung cancer patient and his or her family caregiver. And at the beginning, we had them like you see there, like they were both looking at the instructor, and then we asked them to look at each other when they practice. And what we found was, on one hand, yes, clinical changes in fatigue, in sleep, and in depressive symptoms in both patients and caregivers, but also increased relationship. Even during the practice, they would extend an arm, they would touch their toes, they would really get to connect each other's toes. They would really get to connect to each other in that way. Finally, as we bring these practices to the clinic, we notice that even in one session of meditation, we can reduce symptoms at a clinical level. So you can see here, anxiety, fatigue, distress, well-being, sleep, depressive symptoms, memory, and pain in all clinical significant levels. So in a way, as I say many times, we don't have to go to the monasteries to do these practices. We can do them at an integrative medicine clinic. And what we realized is that as we're doing this for our patients, now our faculty and staff are saying, what about for us? So there's one of the things that we have is we have in our website, and these, even though we started doing some of these videos for patients who were inpatients and couldn't come to the outpatient clinic, now they're in the website. So you can be in Timbuktu and look at these videos, and you don't even have to be a cancer patient. Everyone has access. We have newsletters, and this is what we promote so people can know that we can, what we look at research is being brought to the clinic. So practices of breath, sound, and movement, but also trying to reach to different populations beyond cancer. So this is African-American churchgoers, and trying to really think of how can we benefit them with these practices. We called it harmony and health because at that time, people thought that the word yoga would not be well received, although the teacher who was in this study told me that one of the participants, of the study at the end said, this was great. It just reminded me of yoga. So sometimes as researchers, we overthink things. Also doing in other populations, such as people with after stroke, finding some improvements. Of course, starting some apps. Actually, I was talking today to Dr. Lopez about the results of this study. So soon they'll be published. So I cannot talk yet about them, but soon. And with that, the idea of how we can bring these practices beyond the patients, but also to whatever we are. So I changed the acronym of CPR. So instead of just cardiopulmonary resuscitation, it's compassionate professional renewal. How by connecting and open our heart, be more compassionate to the suffering of others and ourselves, and really renew ourselves in our professions and personally. So in a way, as we say in the Tibetan tradition, open the sky outside and inside and really flourish. So even if the situation is difficult, like the lotus that is in the mud, it can still grow and flourish. And so the idea is that it's not just one lotus, but that we as a community flourish. So bringing this to different environments, of course, starting with kids, but in any environment is important. So that's why now in the Mind, Body, Spirit Institute here at the Jung Center, this is what we're doing. And now since COVID, we've been doing free meditations every week available to people, including some in Spanish. And when we can, we do things. We just started, we don't have the beautiful botanic garden or the arboretum that you have, but we have a new Houston Botanic Garden here. And we've done some meditations there, and we're doing more things for them as well. So finally, this is this is one of my last published book, and that's His Holiness. So it was through his teachings that I got to publish that. And I have something that this might be fun for Mark and Andy to see. This is the cover of my next book. And it will be published in November, but they just gave me the cover, so I thought you'll like it. At least the cover is fun. We'll see what happens inside. And so, as always, one of the things I always loved about these practices and about the Dalai Lama and many of my teachers, it is about being serious, but it's also not forgetting to laugh. So please remember that meditation, laughter is also important. So thank you very much. And I want to thank Mathieu Ricard for that photo, who he's, besides a great meditator, he's a great photographer. And this is the way to contact me. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Chaoul. So we are going to take some questions now. So I think the way that we'll do it is, if you have a question, you can either type your question in to the chat or just type your name in, and then I'll call on you and you can ask your question. So either way, that way, you know, I'll be able to see the order of who had questions. All right. Well, I see Joaquim first. So my student, Joaquim, has a question. So go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say, sir, thank you so much for sharing your story. It was incredible. I have a couple of friends actually from Argentina that I grew up with in high school, and I still, so I had a lot of pride for hearing from some Argentine as well. I'm a international relations major. I've had the pleasure of being in several of Dr. Strauss's classes, so I'm passionate with government. And so a question I want to ask is, I really like all the kind of policies and sort of non-traditional medicine and teachings that you sort of been talking about. I've never heard of this, and I've just been trying to get into meditation and yoga from my friend Alicia, who Dr. Strauss knows. I really like it, but how has it been to try and get this to be embraced by national governments? So when we talk kind of healthcare policy here, a lot of it is trying to do more Western medicine, but how is it kind of picked up in governments and in government funding for picking up what you're trying to teach for people? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Joaquin. So that's something that it's slowly, in some areas, it is moving. In some countries, as you can imagine, some countries are moving much faster than us. So, for example, in the UK, they have some of these practices as part of a possibility of an extended medical insurance. The same in Israel, and the same in, for example, in countries like Germany and Austria. This whole area of spa, as well as in Scandinavia, they do integrate it much better than us. The other thing that is happening, and sometimes you have it in the model of whether it's either in trauma or you have in psychology, they're used some of these adaptive practices. And so they're able to bring them from that perspective. So, and you know, now actually with COVID, this whole area of mental health that is growing, I think more of these practices will be accepted and embraced. What I see is, for example, insurance agencies, medical insurance, and I know one in particular that after the owner had an accident, he was helped through yoga and meditation. He brought yoga and meditation to his employees, but for some reason, he left it not to cover every one of his clients. He let the organizations do that. I asked him actually that directly. So I think we're still in a long journey for that. And that's why one of the things that we do, for example, at our integrative medicine, but the same many of these integrative medicine centers do, is that they offer the group classes for free. At least you start getting that, and so you don't have to pay for it. So therefore, it's not need to be reimbursed. So that's one area. But then what happens is that these practitioners also don't get paid as much either. So I think what we do need to do is embrace it with policy. I think you're totally right that should be the change. In fact, I think that the best for integrative medicine is to not exist as a separate entity, but actually be part of medicine, or maybe change the word medicine to health, which is done in some of the organizations, including NCOM becoming NCI. So I hope that helps.
All right, thank you so much. Now we have a few questions. Well, the first I want to note is this talk will be on YouTube, our YouTube channel, which I've posted to the Q&A tomorrow. So you'll be able to, if you want to review it or share it with your friends, you'll be able to find it on the TCU Asian Studies YouTube channel. Irada asked about when the Tibetan yoga book is going to be published.
Sure. So the first one that I showed, it's already being published by Hay House, and it's called Tibetan Yoga for Health and Well-Being. And so you can find it in Amazon or wherever. And then the next one, it's going to be in November, fingers crossed. So that's the expectation. Thank you for asking.
Okay, and I think
Thank you, Antoinette.
Diane has a question. Was that Diane?
Yes.
For some reason, the name is blocked on my. Okay, yes, Diane, go ahead. Dr. Snow.
Thank you. Yeah, Diane's great. Thank you. Hi, Ale. Good to see you again.
Hi, good to see you. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm curious about whether any of these scientific medical studies are being done in children. It seems like a place that we really need to be paying a lot of attention, and one, teaching them to do meditation to begin with and what mindfulness is all about at a very young age. But then I'm interested to see if any of these studies are being looked at in cancer patients who are children.
Yeah. There's less in terms of studies, but there's quite a bit in terms of bringing it to schools. And I know Andy and Mark know about this. There's a lot of bringing these practices to schools, but not necessarily doing research in that same way. Now, partly is consent forms in the US with the legalities under 18 and so forth. There's a lot of complications with consent forms and so forth. But it is being brought. So, for example, in some what it is being brought interesting or has better reception that I've found in cancer patients that are children, or children that are cancer that happen to have cancer. Music therapy has been an incredible way also for them to find a way into a contemplative practice as well. And relaxing in its own way just by music therapy. So, but I don't know of specific studies. And again, do we always need clinical studies for this? Could we do maybe more social or anthropological studies that may also find the benefits with qualitative research? And I think that might be another way of doing it as well. Does it make sense?
All right, I'm not seeing there's any more names or questions in the chat. So if anyone wants to raise their hand or click the little hand raise or just jump in and ask a question. There's not a huge audience here, so I don't think it'll be too unruly. You seem somewhat shy anyway, so. Any other questions? All right, well,
I don't want to lose the opportunity to hear from Ale. What have you noticed, I guess, about mind body or in any dimension that COVID down there in Houston with the Jung Center, or whatever, just what's news in this context?
Yeah, thank you for that question, actually. We were talking yesterday with our staff here that it's the bad news that bring good news. If you are a psychologist in probably anywhere, your business is blooming, right? If what's happening in the meditation area, which is interesting, is because we are and everything is done in Zoom. I mean, you can be with the Dalai Lama, from your home. Now, what's also happened in some of these areas is people get exhausted of so many possibilities that are there. Before you would go, like, even if I'm trying to follow just my teacher, Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, right? If, I would go when he comes to Houston, I would go sometimes to Virginia, but I cannot follow him all over the world. Now I can. He could do a retreat that it's called for Poland, but it's online. So I can go in, another one that is for Houston, and so a lot of people have, so many things going on. But the good thing is that too, there's so much available that people are using it. What we've seen both in that area of Dharma, like, retreats that before had 100 people now have 900 people. And they're, with Zoom, you can translate simultaneously in many different languages. So you could reach people in Argentina in Spanish, you could be people in Brazil in Portuguese, and so forth. Now, what I've been seeing is the aspect of community. And this is the part that I find very, very supportive. And, from the Buddhist perspective, when we talk about the third jewel, we talk about the Sangha, right? The community. And even though traditionally it's referred to monks and nuns, today we talk about Sangha, about any practitioner. And what I find is that when we connect in this way, whether it's a Buddhist practice or whether it's sitting in meditation, and we're doing meditations that are very short. I do a lot of meditations for the medical center. I was doing one right before this of 15 minutes. So every week, 15 minutes, twice a week. And I have to admit that at the beginning, I was like, really? 15 minutes? It's like breathing in, breathing out, goodbye. But actually, if you're there for 15 minutes, is great. And we have adopted that here. 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour in English, in Spanish. And what we notice is the mandala of Zoom becomes bigger. And what we notice is people, as we see in our group practices when they are on site, that people want to join because they're struggling and they want to connect for a moment. It is about meditation, but it's also about meditating together. And it's about checking in and saying, hey, how are you? How you been? I haven't seen you for a while. Or, you always come with that interesting back screen. What's going on? You changed your screen today, or whatever it is, but it creates community. And in fact, I took that name, and the meditations that we do every week, we call it the power of community, because we really feel connected to each other. And even when I'm not guiding, I always there, because it's like feeling part of it. And so I think that sense of belonging, as in practice, that we see in Sangha, we see now in Zoom. So I actually just saw an article that I didn't get to read yet in Tricycle, and I think it's called something, The Buddha in Zoom. So maybe there's something on that.
It looks like Oscar asked about what kind of meditation do you teach, practice? Is it related to Transcendental Meditation or the Maharishi International University?
Thank you, Oscar. Actually, I started years ago with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi with TM, Transcendental Meditation. But I then moved into more the Tibetan practices. So in the Tibetan practices, one of the things that happens is that you have tons of practice. They claim 84,000. I can't say that I counted that. But there's practices that sometimes are more related to body. So what I meant by Tibetan yoga, whether it's Salung or Trunkor, but they're always with what we call the three doors: body, energy, and mind. So, but some are mantras. So like Transcendental Meditation, even though we don't necessarily have secret mantras, we all recite a mantra. And there's, again, like what I was telling Andy before, this sense of community of reciting together. So there's practices of visualization. There's practices of shamatha, or focusing or calming the mind. There's practices that include different kinds of breathing, and there's practices that include different kind of postures. And I do want to say that in particular, one of the things that we emphasize is that when we do the practices, particularly related to the body, it's not just about the body. So it's not a just asana practice. It's not the same as just having exercise, but it is body, breath, and mind. And so one of the other things that I'm doing with Rinpoche is every month we have a dialogue of science and spirituality. We started 2 days ago with Lorenzo Cohen and Sadbir Khalsa. Next month on March 3rd, we're doing one with someone that Andy and Mark know well, Judith Simmer Brown, and Shirley Tellis from the Patanjali Research Institute in Haridwar in India. And then the third one will be on Mind with Eve Ekman in Berkeley and with Elisa Cosasa down in Sao Paulo, Brazil. So more things to come.
Well, thank you so much. It looks like that was our last question.
Okay.
So thank you so much. Like I said, the link to the Asian Studies YouTube is in the chat. So feel free to take another look at the talk tomorrow. Thank you so much for your time and your insights, Dr. Chaoul. It was really interesting. Yeah, and we hope that we can bring you back to TCU in person sometime soon.
Thank you. And don't forget to really take a moment to stop and take a deep breath and kind of give a little hug to your heart and gratitude before you continue and proceed. So thank you, everyone. It's been great. It's always great to be with, horned frogs.